I am so conservative.
Rationalize in my head. These are things I read in the
I'm going to talk about Willow Creek.
Okay.
Willow Creek, a few years back, had
remembered at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah. I am so conservative. If you didn't jump to conclusions, you might not get any exercise. I am so conservative. And welcome to the Unknown Webcast. In our increasingly politically correct culture, trigger warnings are becoming more and more necessary for those viewers who are joining us for the first time. They might hear something that would offend them, challenge their ideas, and be generally uncomfortable. So this is a trigger warning. I really am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving. And that means I'm theologically conservative as well. However, I may be willing to change my ideas if someone can make a good, reasonable, biblical, logical case for such a change. However, for those new, this is not a safe space if you're easily offended. Today's January 19, 2021, and this is broadcast number 224. Joining us on today's Unknown Webcast is our friend. I think he's still our friend, but we'll see at the end.
We'll find out.
Tom Gilson, senior editor of The Stream and author of Too Good to Be False, How Jesus' Incomparable Character Reveals His Reality. And Tom likes long titles, by the way. Today, we're looking at evangelicals and politics. Have they traded faith for political clout? My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc., which produces the Unknown Webcast, and our senior researcher, co-host, and Time Magazine's 2006 Person of the Year, Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm trees came outside their shadows, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Yes, I really was Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 2006. That's why the cover, unfortunately, does not have my photo on it, but I showed up a little late and they finally pasted it in, so there I am. Our sponsors for this webcast include Bible Buffet, It's Not Your Father's Worship Experience, the Bible Buffet, and Carbona Grande Resorts and Spas, the investment opportunity of the new climate world order. And as has become our practice as of late, our legal disclaimer that our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, so we'll insert Tom Gilson, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content on the Unknown Webcast, hereafter known as the webcast, although we will probably not mention it again. This satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinion regarding this satirical content. That is straight from our law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Welcome, Tom Gilson.
Now, thank you.
I want to mention, yes, he's a senior editor for The Stream, but he's also the author of a book that we really like, Too Good to Be False, How Jesus' Incomparable Character Reveals His Reality. And
was that Frankie Valli, Too Good to Be False?
I don't know.
So Tom, has anyone soundly refuted your thesis of the book yet?
Oh, that's interesting question, because I've had several people say that I had said all kinds of things wrong, and it was just a terrible presentation, and they hadn't read the book. that's kind of a weak thing, but they did a masterful job of refuting things that I hadn't said. It was,
well, at least they did a good job. At least they can be proud
they
of.
did a good job. Yeah, what I have
What-
trouble understanding is people are, in my experience, a whole lot of atheists are incredibly. By the way, I just had to send an email to someone who's asking me to do something right now. I hate it when that happens at the start of an interview.
Yeah.
And anyway, I'm done with that. The thing that I keep running into is people who are refuting arguments that no one makes, and I don't know why that's interesting.
Well,
I would be bored. It's all this straw man misrepresentation of things that they claim Christians say, and they refute it, and they have refuted things that no Christian believes. And
well, my grandma and your grandma were sitting by the fire. My grandma told your grandma going to set your straw man on fire. Like, so yeah, it's it's a really good song, but people. First of all, I think there's two reasons why the two main reasons, they're not really listening. And the second reason is they draw conclusions that you are drawing from your own premises.
Right.
Right. Or they begin with conclusions based on
usually they are preconceived. In other words, anyone who believes X must be a Nazi, or anyone who believes Y must be in favor of lobotomizing Democrats or something. I don't know. Just think of the worst possible thing you can think of.
Right. My friend Dr. Donald Wilson, he posts on Facebook, and several times he will say, before you respond, read the article. Everything else will be deleted.
And you might go and read it again. I mean, lately with critical race theory, the thing you hear the most, one of the typical things you hear is that if you deny systemic racism, therefore you deny racism exists. Therefore you deny we have a racial problem. Therefore you deny all of it. No, I'm sorry. I never said those things. I don't believe those things. Please go away and come back when you've listened.
All right, so Tom's articles. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, the funniest one with "Too Good to Be False" was this YouTuber who heard me say in an interview with another interviewer, Frank Turek, that Jesus has the unique character in all fiction, literature, and so on of being a character who didn't grow. He was perfect from the beginning. And this YouTuber who calls himself Paul Logia just jumped all over me about that. He said that's what they call a Mary Sue. Mary Sue in fan fiction is a too perfect character. Mary Sues are awful. They're boring. Nobody's interested in Mary Sues. It's a sign of bad writing, and it's just awful. And I thought,
Jesus is just a fictional
Paul Logia, have you missed the fact that if Jesus is supposed to be a boring character that no one's interested in, he kind of messed up on that? I mean, if he's a Mary Sue and nobody's interested in Mary Sue's, is he not an exception to that rule? Because 2,000 years later, billions of people, that's not your usual nobody's interested in you kind of character. I thought he missed a step there. And by the way, I had in my book, I covered that in some depth for 4 pages. He just hadn't read the book.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and not only Christians that follow him, but non-Christians that want to claim him as part of their faith system. Yeah. So that doesn't really speak of boring.
I was like, what's missing here, Paul Logia?
Like a reasonable argument. That's what's missing.
Oh, man, maybe that's what's missing. Yeah,
which brings us to a phenomenon we're experiencing that you wrote on a couple of weeks ago in an article titled "Evangelicals are more involved in politics than in the work and purpose of Jesus Christ. Appearance or reality? ? And you start off with, I'm going to share this. You start off with a quote from a Juanita, which says this: American evangelicalism is no longer seen in more and more instances as part or as Christian or part of the church. It is viewed as a political entity. This they have done to themselves by being more involved in politics than in the work and purpose of the Church of Jesus Christ. Now, as you go through your article, you seem to take disagreement with that idea.
Who wrote this now? Somebody whose name we don't need to know, or
just a commenter who called herself Juanita.
Okay.
But it's a common enough sentiment that I just picked her comment out of a previous stream article as representative of it. You've heard it, haven't you?
Well, yeah, when our church changed its name, we used to be called Evangelical Presbyterian Church. We are now Providence Christian Church.
Providentially, that's
providentially true. We took Presbyterian out because a lot of people come down to Florida from the upper Midwest, where Presbyterian is PCUSA.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very liberal. And we've had people say, we've driven past your church for 5 years without darkening our door. We come to you and now we realize you guys really preach the gospel. You believe in the scriptures. We also took evangelical out because of this identification of evangelical with politics.
Okay. Yep.
So we hate to do that. I mean, evangelical is a great word, but gay was a great word too. And now look what happened to it. So, you can't even sing the ending credits to the Flintstones anymore. So, so it's like language does change. What's in common currency shifts in meaning. But I'd like to hear how you responded to this person before I say anything more.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. Some of it's perception. Some of it is it's all perception. And some of it is reality in the sense that we are involved in politics. Should we be involved in politics? I would say that in America, we have a duty to be involved in politics that does not derive from the Bible. It derives from the Constitution, and that's okay. Because in America, the Constitution makes you and me members of the government. We just are members of the government, at least on election day. Mm-hmm. It is part of our identity as citizens of America. It's not biblical. It's not anti-biblical. It's just a fact of being an American. And if you are a member of the government, you can either be a good one or a bad one. You can be irresponsible or you can be responsible. You can choose wisely. You can choose poorly. You can say you don't care. But to be involved in politics in America is not an option. You are a member of the government because you are an American citizen if you are. So your only real option is how well you're going to do at that and how responsibly and how wisely. You can abdicate, but you cannot otherwise.
I would say, this is really, this is typical liberal hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. During the 60s, liberal ministers were everywhere in the anti-Vietnam protests and in the civil rights movement protests. Oh, yeah. They were everywhere. They were ubiquitous.
Daniel Berrigan. Yeah.
Right. In the 80s, Jesse Jackson ran for president. There was I can't think of a single minister. There might have been one, but in my lifetime, I can't think of a minister who ran for political office even until I'm sure there were that ran for lower offices, but until Jackson came along, nobody thought of president. So then everybody's appalled when Pat Robertson gets the same idea. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's okay for us. It's not okay for you. So, right. If any part of the American clergy or of American Christianity has so thoroughly identified itself with one and only one political point of view, it is the liberal Christian community that has sold its soul to the Democratic Party. So don't give me any of this. You sold your soul to the GOP. You guys beat us to that marketplace about 25 years before we got there. You were already there.
And by the way, when I say election day, I don't mean it's just election day. The heritage of our country is not just to vote, but also to be responsibly involved in civic life in between elections. So I don't want to limit it to that, but
no, and
yeah,
to lobby for our particular views to become law, for example, and I would say to argue for those who are opposed to our views that they also have the opportunity to lobby for their worldview to be in legislation, even if they're competing. That is the idea of free exchange of ideas.
right.
Right? And debate. And as citizens, I mean, you pointed out, okay, we're citizens. We're part of the government. That's a really important fact that most people miss, and I try to emphasize, but they don't quite get it. You can be a good part of the government, a bad part of the government, or in some cases, because you don't like either of the main choices, you could abstain from voting. That doesn't make you good or bad. It just means I do not believe either one has the right answer. Would that be an accurate assumption?
Yeah. Or you can abdicate and say, I'm not going to even be involved. And that's different from abstaining.
Right.
Yeah, but abstaining is not necessarily irresponsible. Abdicating probably is.
I like that. That's a good description of both. Okay, so abstaining is not necessarily irresponsible. Advocating is.
Yeah.
Abdicating.
Abdicating. Yeah.
Abdicating. I get that B.
Small difference there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you and I both like words, and so sometimes that small difference makes a huge difference in what you conveyed.
Sure. Yeah.
You point out, and this is something we've already been talking about a little bit, that after the Obergefell decision, someone had asked you a question. If you Christians are so concerned about marriage, why don't you put as much effort into stopping divorce as you do into stopping gay marriage? And your response is?
My response is you got to get a picture of the whole picture. You got to understand. And this actually generalizes to the whole question of why are we so involved in politics? As Juanita said, you're doing that more than you're doing the work of the local church. Well, no, we aren't. Good grief. In terms of divorce ministry, what are we doing to stop divorce? Well, we're not lobbying the Supreme Court, or we're not lobbying Congress. We're not trying to pressure the Supreme Court, because that would be just stupid strategy at this point. We're not going to get anywhere. What we are doing is thousands, and I don't know the count, thousands and thousands and thousands of sermons, thousands, even more hours of counseling, many, many more Christian conferences on marriage, many books published, hours and hours of radio time, small groups, teachings. We are doing an awful lot to stop divorce. It's just not in the public square the same way our advocacy against homosexual marriage was, because it's just where it belongs.
Yeah,
it doesn't belong in the public square.
The seminars. What do you think? What do you think? One of the things that brought out focus on the family as a popular radio program. What do you think generated that? What do you think generated all those seminars? So then, as soon as you mention those things, of course, they hate those things.
Right.
Focus on your own bleep family, say the bumper stickers. So it's like it's like we can't win. It's like when either they accuse us of not doing it, and then we point out that we do it, and then they tell us what they don't like about how we're doing it.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like the lady who came up to D.L. Moody, or the guy or somebody. Moody, I don't like the way you do evangelism. Well, how do you do evangelism? I don't. Well, I like the way I don't do it, or I do it better than the way you don't do it. So they're not doing anything to stop divorce.
Right. And the question of divorce, by the way, is, I would argue, a spiritual question primarily, that really can only be properly handled through spiritual means, i.e., what does the Bible say about our relationships? And it is in conflict with a culture that is ever moving forward to say those kinds of relationships are just so last decade. All that really matters is, are you happy in however sexual engagement you are participating?
Are you promoting the flavor, the sexual flavor of the month? Today it's transgenderism. Are you being an ally to those people? So yeah.
So I would argue that also is a big factor in the whole question of of divorce. So you have on the one side saying, okay, here's what the biblical teaching is on these relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and culture is going, no, we need this non-biblical teaching in order to be fully fulfilled in our sexual drives, and
plus they say you're on the wrong side of history, and I say I'm just trying to be on the side of history that the fire and brimstone isn't going to land on.
Yeah, well, that's
right. Yeah, and I was just looking to see if I had it in reach. I have an earlier book published with Kregel called "Critical Conversations: A Christian Parent's Guide to Discussing Homosexuality with Teens." There's a whole list in there, a couple dozen things that they will say against Christians on that line. And I just give, parents, here's how you tell your teen they can answer it. But the whole problem with marriage, it didn't originate with the homosexual marriage movement. It originated really with the demise or the beginnings of the downfall of marriage in the 60s.
Right.
What the gay marriage movement did was say, not only are we going to live with that, we're going to put our stamp of hearty endorsement on it.
Right.
And what it is a culture of marriage that's basically you and me, babe. And doesn't care about kids, doesn't need to worry about anything, but just you and me, babe. And when straights started marrying that way and making it disposable, there wasn't really any good philosophical reason for gays to join in.
I think we, as evangelicals, as Americans, as just regular people, we tend to forget the role that the market played in this. So, we are kind of a little bit beside ourselves, and I'm not criticizing that we are upset about it. We should be upset when when we have the social media giants, and we have these people who are the kings and queens of business today, the business empires that are trying to force this new morality down our throats. But think about, I've got old magazines on my shelves going back to the 70s. Remember Dewar's Scotch, or was it Dewar's Whiskey, whatever? They had this series of ads in which they talked about things being downright upright. It became a slogan. It's downright upright. Dewar's Whiskey. It's downright upright. What was downright upright? Well, these ads had these little stories, vignettes, in which a woman she's got her little glass of Dewar's, and and her blouse is partly open, and she's talking about how she's going to have a gentleman come visit her alone that night, and she says people used to criticize us about that, but now it's just downright upright. This is back in the 70s. The sexual revolution was being promoted actively on Madison Avenue.
So as you pointed out, the church is addressing this, has been addressing this. My only point is that culture is fighting against it with everything they have, and then want to point the finger and say, you're not even trying to solve the problem. And you're going, yes, we are.
Right.
And we have the evidence to prove it.
Right. Well, so, you come back to the whole question, should we be involved in politics? There was one other thing I wrote in this article is I went back to the book by David Kinnaman and Gabe Lyons called Unchristian, and it was a study of of how young people perceived Christians, evangelicals in particular, back in 2007. And the complaint then too was that we were too political, but they opened a chapter there with a quote that really, really captures it. It says, the quote was from someone they called Brandon, who said, 20 years ago, when I was looking at evangelical Christianity from the inside, it seems like a movement bursting with energy to spread good news to people. Looking at it from the outside today, the message seems to have been lost in exchange for an aggressive political strategy that demonizes segments of society.
It's because they're not listening to us.
It's because he's on the insider versus the outside. What are you going to see on the inside? You're going to see what we're saying.
Right.
What are you going to all kinds of audiences? What are you going to see on the outside? You're going to see what we put in the newspapers and on. Yeah.
He's going to hear.
Why would you expect that not to be political?
Right. What it's being mediated through the media. It's being mediated second, third hand. It's so it's being mediated by people who believe that anyone who votes for the GOP or any conservative candidate, like a libertarian or something, is a person who is, again, on the wrong side of history. They're probably sociopathic in some sense. They're definitely kind of Neanderthal in their outlook, and we now must deplatform them. We now must we deprogram them, and so like this is. So when you constantly hear this barrage of vicious left-wing commentary on any group, you're going to start believing it. You're going to start.
And now, something Tom said is really, I think I want to come back to this because this is important. Being inside and hearing one thing, and being outside and then hearing something else, reminds me of a number of things. Feeding the poor. The accusation is you don't care about feeding the poor. On the inside, we see the church doing massive works just in that direction. What the church doesn't do is say the government needs to feed the poor. That's the disconnect. So I don't know. Have you seen the documentary Uncle Tom yet?
No.
You really need to see that. It's very well done. But you have a young black African American who grew up Democrat, and he came to the Lord, and his friend kind of challenged him to look at the platforms on both parties. And as he did, he realized he's not really a Democrat. And then he asked his friend, he said, well, what about feeding the poor? Isn't that something we should do? And he said, I'm not going to answer that question. I want you to go and read. And he started reading the Gospels. And he came back and goes, I'm supposed to feed the poor. That's my job as a believer in cooperation with the body of Christ. And so, yes, we feed the poor, but where is that supposed to be done? The church is supposed to do that. And they are. Oh, okay.
We are. And we are doing so many more things that are not being touted and don't need to be. It's not like somebody's doing us wrong by not putting the word out. They don't need to be touted. Certain things need to be public, certain things don't. And so the only strange thing is when people complain that certain things we're doing in normal church ministry aren't making the news. What did they expect?
Yeah.
Right. So just because it's not making news doesn't mean we're not doing it.
Right.
and that's a really important point.
Yeah.
As you go through the article, I mean, it's again, I want to recommend people go read the article. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, Tom. I'm not going to. We want to talk about issues surrounding it. But kind of about 2/3 of the way through, you make a statement that I want to bring up here because I think it's a really important element in the whole discussion. We're kind of talking about this right now. So it could be that our politics is more visible now because it's more unpopular, more uncontroversial. It's more visible because it's more unpopular and more controversial. What do you mean by that?
It's if you say things everybody expects you to say, it's the old man bites dog thing. If a dog bites a man, that's not news. If a man bites a dog, that's news. If you say something controversial, it's more likely to get attention. There's even a factor that people who do survey research have to take into account, which is if you ask for open-ended answers to, what do you think about X, you will hear a lot more from people who don't like X than from people who do. It's a negativity bias. That if you do something that people aren't going to like, they will highlight it more. We are doing things that people who control the media don't like, and they will highlight the negative of it more than they will the things that we're doing that they agree with or that they would approve of. So
I thought when a man bites a dog, it's China. I thought they were in China. No, I'm just
Yeah.
so there's someplace.
Yeah, I have been to South China, and you do not ask. You just don't ask. No.
You don't.
Yeah,
You
the
don't.
saying, even the people in North China will say of the people in South China, they'll eat anything that has four legs, including the table. So, I mean, anyway, you don't ask.
I don't.
So, we mentioned earlier that on the progressive side, they want to be engaged in politics, and that is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to say that this is the Christian thing, and they have an idea of a Jesus who is ever loving, never says anything bad, doesn't use satire, is accepting of every kind of sexual, engagement, whatever. And part of it is that they seem to only selectively look at Scripture. And we have a sponsor that sort of deals with that.
Which is why we have the question, are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the word and the meat of the word? Are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the word? Does your pastor take the whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you need to check out the Bible Buffet. Everything at the Bible Buffet is prepared with your comfort and enjoyment in view. Everything there is gluten-free, trans-fat-free, and truth claim-free. And all their dishes are piping hot and ready to eat. And even in this time of pandemic, they're always open. Just ask for Bible Buffet carry out. Our regular Sunday specials include Aryan appetizers, Sibelian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, and Pelagian pie. And don't forget, the Bible Buffet is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. The Bible Buffet, it's not your father's worship experience, but it should be yours. So
the Church of Smorgasbordianism.
At least once. So you talked about negativity bias. You talked about maybe that was your main point, that there is negativity bias in terms of when you're selling
if you ask the question, what do you think of, and then fill in the blank, which is an undefined. In fact, I get reporters sometimes that ask me that question, and I don't answer it. I say, tell me exactly what it is that you want to know.
Yeah.
Because they'll use that as a gotcha. Now, I want to come back to the statement, though. It could be that our politics is more visible now because it's more unpopular, more uncontroversial, or more controversial.
Yeah.
What has changed, and we were talking about this before we started, to make it more visible and controversial?
It's not us. It's the Christian position on so many of these things: marriage, morality, economics. The historic Christian position hasn't shifted very much, but we are in a country that has moved far to the left, and we have, as a result, come to look like we're far to the right, where in fact we are still occupying the same position, in at least a thought position that previously would have been considered middle of the road and centrist. So there's a lot of in the leftist position. There's a very ominous thing, by the way, taking place tomorrow, and it would be ominous if it were from the right. It is ominous. It being from the left, it doesn't matter who, it matters what. And this is what it is. Tomorrow, for the first time in American history, we will have one ideology, essentially one party, controlling the White House, both houses of Congress, and the media in a big way. And the potential of also controlling the Supreme Court if they follow through on threats or whatever promises, whatever, to pack the court. We are in a position now where the power centers of the country, education as well, are controlled by one thought, one ideology. That is, by itself, just, whichever ideology it was, by itself, that would be a very dangerous formula for authoritarianism or even totalitarianism. That ideology will be in control of the power centers tomorrow, after the inauguration, and it's opposed to Christianity. There's a definite opposition to Christianity there. They don't like us, so they want to paint us in a bad light. It's not just negativity bias; it's hate.
Right. We some of our Illinois state senators sent a document to the Harris-Biden administration asking that they eliminate all religious influence in government, number one, and number two, that they eliminate free speech for certain religious groups. They are unnamed, but it's in that document from the state of Illinois to the White House.
I would like to. Would you send me that after this interview?
Yeah, I'd like a copy of that too.
Yeah, that's ominous. That's what happens when you have that kind of hegemony over power is that it loses accountability, and people begin to think that they have the right. They begin to think that they are right. They begin to lose contact with the idea that there are alternate opinions and beliefs. They begin to lose all accountability, and it gets really restrictive of freedom. That's not the way America was meant to be. And if it weren't for the fact that I've been to communist countries, I've seen how believers there can still have joy, I would be worried right now.
Yeah. Just going to Venezuela should make you concerned.
I mean, there is cause for worry. It's just that there is overwhelming cause for joy, even no matter what. It is scary time, though.
And to your point, though, it isn't one ideology over another. Whether it's progressivism or strong conservatism, like we have the New Apostolic Reformation. We've done several programs on them, arguing that they have the Seven Mountain Mandate, and it is up to them to take over the government, and all of the wealth of the nations is to come to them. I have to tell you, I would be terrified if we ended up having the pretense of a theocracy in America. That would not be any better than what we're heading into now.
Right. It's anybody who's got that much unaccountable power. There is one person in history who has held power and used it strictly for others, and that's Jesus Christ. That's one of the main points of my book, Too Good to Be False. It's extremely unique. It is one person in all of history and literature and imagination anywhere who has been able to handle that kind of power. You don't do that to any of us. It's why Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings said, "I will not touch the One Ring." He knew that he did not have what it took to stay to keep his integrity with that kind of power.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, it's like they say, when power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
It is difficult being human to live an unaccountable life.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We see that all the time. We see ministers fall. Why? Because they're unaccountable. And the flesh gets in the way. The idea that I'm sort of above being called to question gives you permission almost to behave badly.
And by the way, an article just published in the last hour on the strain that I wrote about CNN. They're trying to force at least some other people are saying they should force the cable network should take Newsmax and One American News Network off because they are speaking dangerous things about election denialism and so on. That is an abuse of power, and it is CNN trying to eliminate accountability. Look, if Newsmax and One American News Network were all wrong, they should still be allowed to speak and CNN should be saying, thank you for keeping us honest, if that were what CNN were for.
This morning and yesterday, I was listening to it was a 90-minute lecture on philosophy out of Oxford University, and it's trying to bring philosophy down to a lay level. The lady making the presentation did a very good job, and she was talking about the difference between utilitarianism and deontology. Of course, utilitarianism basically says the greatest good for the greatest number. That's what makes things right or wrong. So what's right today could be wrong tomorrow. So you can see how a utilitarian might say, well, free speech was right for the 18th century, but it's not quite right today. The deontologists would say that no, there are certain things that are just morally right and morally wrong. They've always been that way, even if you don't ground it in God or the God of the Bible or any God for that matter. There are certain things they'll say we either know them intuitively or they're always right and they're always wrong. And what fascinated me about this philosopher woman, she was able to present both sides of the case so well that she had to admit, sometimes I've been a utilitarian, and sometimes I've been a deontologist. Sometimes I've gravitated toward one end of the spectrum and sometimes to the other. It's hard to choose. And it dawned on me that because the reason it was hard for her to choose is because her moral viewpoint is not grounded in Scripture. It's not grounded in the God of the Bible. So both sides make good cases, can make persuasive cases, let's put it that way, for their positions. And this is a pretty bright lady. She's brilliant. She had a brilliant presentation, and she was able to make it bring it down to everyone's level. And she's obviously very, very well read and studied. And so I was thinking, what we're hearing now from people on the left who claim to be Christian, who claim to, especially from the critical race theory people, is that the gospel isn't good enough to solve this problem. They're telling us, they're saying, well, we have this new thing, it's called CRT, and this is going to help us. And the Christians, who are not merely deontologists, the Bible believing Christians, they believe that there is right and there is wrong, and it's in Scripture, and it doesn't change for that reason. But they also believe that you're going to have this pendulum swing back and forth until people's hearts are changed, until the gospel is presented, until people become Christians. And so to me, what we're going through right now, yes, try to persuade as many people as possible of the proper point of view on freedom, liberty, justice, and those things. But give that about 30 seconds and then go right into a gospel presentation. That's what we need to change society right now.
Yeah, and the whole CRT thing being in a better, more gospel-y thing is just it's a wad of nonsense. By the way, deontology, they sometimes called the duty-based approach to ethics. The Bible is both. We have moral duties, and if we live up to them, it will bring the greater good to the greater number of people.
Yeah, right.
So it's a both and in the Bible's case, because God knows what he's doing. But the CRT approach is to solve problems through shame, and especially to the dominant culture of white men like you and me, that the way we get better is by experiencing shame. Shame doesn't have that effect. It doesn't unite people. Oh, I'm being shamed, therefore I will love you more. That doesn't work. I will care for you more. It just doesn't have that effect. What it does is some of us will withdraw, some of us will engage, but we'll engage the way I do, I hope, which is by saying, respectfully, I disagree. Here's where I stand. Other people will respond by forming white supremacist groups. That's what shame does. Right. And it's a stupid answer. There's the way the Bible says to solve problems like this, the way Martin Luther King Jr. sought to solve the problem was through a gospel of reconciliation, through grace, through forgiveness, through the cross. And that's the way you do it. It's not like maybe I thought about this. No, I'm actually pretty passionate about that.
And you should be passionate about that. Ron is, I know, and I am as well. One of the things that I often argue when I am in churches and they're trying to say, okay, how do we deal with the cultural changes, and I say, well, the first thing you need to do is, as a church, you need to stay close in teaching sound doctrine on a regular basis, number one. Number two, you need to become close as a community of faith. You need to know who everybody is and care for one another. Number three, as you move out, people care more about how you live your life in the open in your neighborhoods than they do about who you voted for. And so care for your neighbors, care for the elderly, help those who are struggling, however, food or whatever it is. There are things we can do individually. We can't fix everything, but we can fix some things. And as people come to the faith, then an interesting thing happens. The Holy Spirit works within them. They become more acquainted with Scripture, and their lives become transformed. As individual lives become transformed, the group grows larger, and your neighborhood is transformed. That's how it happens.
Right. It has to happen on that level. I think too, though, there's a persuasion level, which is to say, if we can't persuade everybody to follow Christ, we can at least persuade each other that the gospel is still good. We can still offer persuasion to others that the gospel is still good. We can stake our ground that the gospel is still good. That's probably part of good gospel teaching, is not just to say that you're saved and Jesus died for your sins and you're going to heaven. But in the meantime, if you follow his ways, even though everybody says his ways are repressive, they're wrong, Jesus is right. And by the way, not just to say it, but to explain why. I don't want to cut that part out.
Well, it's interesting. We've talked about this, and we've written on this as well, that even atheists today, the new atheist movement, are starting to defend Christianity. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen, probably. But you have Tom Holland, for example, in his book Dominion, going, we wouldn't have Western culture if we hadn't had Christianity. And he's come to the realization that others have argued before, that Christianity transformed civilization over the first 300 years of church history.
And I think you'll find among those people, they kind of lean toward the deontology side of the moral spectrum. In other words, there are certain things that are always right and always wrong.
Right.
Right.
But what that also does is it creates cultural peer pressure, which operates off of a Judeo-Christian morality and ethics, even though the culture may not be Christian per se. We've lost that.
Well, it's I think it goes back to, partially at least, this negativity bias that you talked about earlier, Tom. And what that does is, since the it feeds one of the things that CRT people and others who are really radical talk about is you need to amplify the voices of those who have been oppressed. Well, hey, that's all the media knows how to do. That's playing right to what they perceive as their chief strength. That if it bleeds, it leads. If it's negative, that's what sells papers. So when you're amplifying voices of people who are complaining about being oppressed, even when it's a microaggression, which only requires micro forgiveness, but suddenly it is this macro thing that is a plague on society, or whatever the wine du jour, WHINE is, then you have the mechanism is already in place. I mean, I go on Twitter a lot, and I can't think of the last time I saw a tweet that said, "Boy, everything is just going so well for me." I have no complaints.
One of the wine du jours, of course, is global warming is such a problem. Christians don't care about global warming at all.
Speaking of a political issue,
and
we don't care, do we?
Yeah, well, but we do have a sponsor that really likes the idea of climate change.
I mean, doesn't this image just relax you? I mean, I don't worry about anything when I see this. If I'm in this place, I'm not going to worry about global warming. Well, my question is, when you see images like this, what do you think of? Do you think of vacation fun, relaxation, time away with family? Well, there are two words you should be thinking: cha-ching. Because now, any day now, the Arctic beaches of Canada, Alaska, Greenland, and Northern Europe will all look like this, making them the investment opportunity of a lifetime. Work will soon be starting on our new chain of Carbona Grande resorts and spas. Al Gore has assured me this can start any day now. So what you're going to do is you need to contact Oxgore Industries today for a free investment prospectus at 1-800-CLIMATE. Yes, the Carbona Grande Resorts and Spas, the investment opportunity of the new climate world order. Get in on the ground floor, guys. You know,
on the ground floor, yeah.
Renting. I mean,
will become oceanfront property.
Elon Musk says he's going to have a condo waiting for you on Mars, but before that, this is coming. Just remember. So,
okay. So just kind of in recap, we should be involved politically because we are the government.
We are.
Right. We could be a good force in government, a bad force in government. We could abstain at times. We should not abdicate. That is not a proper position. Okay, I think that's fair.
The government of the people, by the people, for the people. That's what we were taught, at least.
That is what we were taught.
Yeah.
Right.
Culture has changed tremendously in my lifetime, and it was going on long before that, this transition. If the church transformed civilization the first 300 years, culture has been transforming the church even over the last 200 years. So we're kind of back almost in the same place we were to begin with. So if you have some bullet point statements as to how we should be involved, what churches can do to think about this. We do have a question. I'm going to hold on to that. From Penn Jam, and it's about your book. How would you respond to the charge from a skeptic that says the beginning of the book, in arguing from what Jesus didn't say do, is just arguing from silence?
Yeah, Paul Logia said that in his video. That's a very specific. This argument in the book is one that has not been presented in 100 years. So it's unfamiliar, and it comes from a direction people do not expect. And the direction is this. It's an argument that's based on the nature of the story. This story is unique. The kind of things that Jesus is presented in the story as doing or not doing constitute the basis of the argument. And the point is that because of the kind of story that we have, it makes it very unlikely that it was the product of legend, the way skeptics think it was the product of legend. So all of the data, because it's all about the story, all of the possible data is there in the story. The fact that something is missing from the story is significant as a description of the story. So arguments from silence are valid if there is they're invalid in cases where you can say, well, maybe there's just some reason it wasn't included. We don't know what the silence means.
Can you be specific as to what silence we're referring to?
Yeah, and okay, yeah, the silence. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead there. The silence is a lot of my argument has to do with things that Jesus didn't say and didn't do. For example, we never see him using his extraordinary powers for his own benefit. We never see him saying, "Thus says the Lord." We never hear him saying, "Our Father," except when he told the disciples to say it. There's lots of things that Jesus didn't do and didn't say. Those are definitions or descriptions of the story. And the story itself is the data for the argument. And it goes in along with the legend skeptic theories, but that's why it's not an invalid argument from silence.
All right, I have a two-part kind of a follow-up to that, because some things are implicit, but you have to read the story to know that. For example, he doesn't say, "Thus saith the Lord," but he does this interesting thing when he says, You have heard it said, and then he quotes Moses, but I say what he has just done is he's elevated his word equal to the one that Moses delivered from God.
And that's part of the uniqueness of the story that makes it, that builds into this argument that I make in it.
I'm not trying to shoot what you're saying down at all, but I think we need to be careful. Strictly speaking, Jesus didn't use his power for his own benefit. But for instance, when they were going to stone him, and he hid himself from their eyes and was able to pass through the crowd.
Yeah.
I mean, that was for our benefit because he had to go to the cross eventually. So strictly speaking, it preserved his life, which you could say was beneficial for him, so that he could die in a much more grueling and more painful way later.
Right.
And we have a similar thing then with the question of, well, he never spoke against homosexuality, which is not exactly true. He didn't overtly say that, but he was a first century rabbi in keeping with first century views of the law.
Not one jot or tittle shall pass
or tittle. Right. And he was clearly on board with sexual immorality being wrong, whatever kind it was.
And homosexuality wasn't a big issue at least in Palestinian Judaism at the time.
Right.
It might have been.
Yeah, it would have been in Greco-Roman culture, right. But not. And the argument from silence there that is not valid because you can't show that Jesus would have been expected to say it.
Right.
And so if you can't show that it would have been expected, then you cannot show that the silence means something.
He also didn't speak against genocide, against child sacrifice, against
internet piracy.
Right. So therefore it's okay, right? He said that whoever teaches people to break even the smallest commandment will be considered smallest in the kingdom of heaven. So,
coming up near the end of our time, I want to go back to my question I was kind of posing. Can you give us maybe some bullet points for evangelicals and maybe for non-evangelicals so that they know how we think about things,
right.
How to determine political involvement appropriately from a biblical standpoint? Because the Bible doesn't tell us to be involved politically, but it does give us guidelines as to how we ought to view the world, and therefore as government, which we are, how to view cultural questions.
Right. I think a lot depends on what happens in this next couple of months, because we are potentially in a turning point, where the answer will be different than it has been for the last several years. And the question is whether or not we are in a specifically governmental anti-Christian environment. If it turns into an anti-Christian environment, then the very first thing we need to do as evangelicals is become very clear that we're going to follow Jesus no matter what and why, that he is the center, that he's worth following no matter what. And if it's anti-Christian environment, governmentally, corporately, job-wise, whatever, we're going to follow Jesus no matter what. We need to know he's that good. We need to know he's that true. We need to know our eternal life depends on it. And we need to be convinced of that. That is job one. And it's always been job one, but it's possibly about to become a lot more obviously job one. And then from there, once we've got that, we need to be thinking well about what government is and what it isn't, and what it should do and what it shouldn't do. And we need to be, probably finding creative ways to speak out in a governmental and media situation where our voice is not being roundly welcomed. So we're going to have to start thinking on a strategic level that we have not been used to doing. We are in a different time where the answers I would have given you even 6 months ago are not quite right. And so I think we're in a time when it's like, okay, we better start thinking strategically and figure some new things out. I wish I knew the answer. All I know is that we need to figure it out.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. You're right. The next 2 months are going to be pretty critical, and next year, in fact.
Okay, so Tom, just so you know, Ron does have to leave like right about at 1 o'clock. So we typically kind of do a little walkout. If you'd like to hang around for another 5 or 10 minutes after that, we can do that and kind of ask questions.
Sure. Yeah, I'm good until another 10 minutes is good for me. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, in the meantime, let's give credit to whom credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Hammond Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummus. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, O.D. Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never.
All right. Thank you, Tom.
And I want to show the book one more time also before we continue, which is Too Good to Be False by Tom Gilson. And if you look in our description underneath, we have a link directly to that. So you can order it and read it and be shocked and amazed.
Happy trails to you.
Adios, hasta luego, and all that.
Right.
So now we can talk about Ron all we want to.
Yeah. I think the record button may still be running, so be
cautious. It is. We're still on board because I control the control button. So
okay. Yeah.
You're right. It's going to be really, I think, challenging to evangelicals. I mean, we have, as you know, we have heresy running rampant through the church in a number of areas, largely from the progressive end of things as well. Critical race theory, which we discussed a little bit already. The Enneagram. I think I sent you a list. We had like now 28 pro Enneagram books in print.
Yeah, and it's not the Enneagram in my mind as much as it is what it represents, which is carelessness about about reality, about truth, about what we're feeding ourselves with, and a willingness to just kind of grab from anywhere.
Right. So that being the case, and with the someone pointed out that 44% of Americans believe Jesus Christ sinned while on earth, and that number is not much smaller within the evangelical church. It's a pretty high percentage in the evangelical church. If that's the case, and it seems to be so, how does that impact then their view on interacting with politics as government officials, essentially?
I haven't thought about that question before. If people think that Jesus, and the heresy and the misunderstanding of Jesus, I would say that what that does is it causes us to look like another special interest group that has our own truth, our own flavor, our own brand of reality, which makes us annoying. Because we come across as if we hold the truth. And that's annoying too, which, by the way, I do not think is a Christian thing to say. You can say it and you can say it rightly, but we don't hold the truth. The truth holds us.
Right.
The way you get past the arrogance of that, people will still think you're arrogant, but the way you do it without being arrogant is by giving primacy to the truth, not my truth. I'm as subject to it. I kneel before the truth of God. God is in charge. It's not my truth. And if I say it's your truth, it's not because it's my truth it's because you are subject to the same truth I'm subject to. If we're not clear on that God has a truth, that God is the truth, there is a reality, and we are subject to it. If we're not clear on that, we're going to look like another special interest group, and that's going to be annoying.
Right. But isn't it, because we live now, oddly enough, in what I have been calling, and maybe there's others doing it as well, a narrative culture, not a truth culture.
Yeah.
The search is for the best story that I can adopt to guide my life with.
Okay.
And if your story is better than my story, I'll take your story. But that doesn't mean that your story is true, because that's not what the search is anymore. How do we interact with that?
I don't know if you set that up for me on purpose, but Too Good to Be False is about the story of Jesus, and it's about how we know that it is actually true.
Right.
It's a great story. Oh my goodness. And Greg Koukl's book, The Story of Reality, goes back to creation and goes through Revelation, and it's a great story. And he also talks in that book about how we know it's true. I'm fine with story. I think we've got one. We've got a bunch of them. It centers in the best one, Too Good to Be False, Jesus, in the Gospels, in other words. But there's one that's true, really true for everyone, and it's a really good story. That's one way I would interact with that.
Right. So you're not divorcing truth from the story. You're saying the story should be true and it should lead you to truth.
Yeah.
But it isn't primarily to make you feel better about your story.
Right. And the whole story theme, I think, is important. My wife and I were, can't go into details, very badly treated by a church a few years ago.
I have been there. I know what that's
like.
like.
And we walked out of a meeting deciding that was the last interaction that we needed to have with that church. It was that bad. It was unusually bad. I've seen some bad. This was really bad. We walked out, and I said to Sarah, okay, that was bad, but we're just part of a story that's been going on for a very long time. God has survived us, meaning the church, for a very long time. God will survive this, and so will we. And by the way, sometimes we do bad things too. The story is a very grand story. It is centered in Jesus. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, which makes it a good as story form goes. But it's got a great ending, and it's got a great coherence to it, and we can be part of it. And I'm okay with story. I love it, but let's not just say any old story. There's a best one and a true one.
Right. I like that. All right. Well, we're going to kind of start calling it a day, because I know you have things you have to get onto. I have things I have to get onto, and people to pick on.
Okay.
and that sort of thing. So thank you, Tom, for being on again with us.
Oh, thank you. Anytime.
In the future, and especially because I love people go and what is your website?
I'm a senior editor at stream.org. I have been blogging for 16 years at a blog called Thinking Christian, thinkingchristian.net, which is one good place to find out about the book Too Good to Be False, too.
Right. Okay. So go to those sources, and you have other really fine writers, and some of which we've had on here, which we really like. So go and they can just like, and they can subscribe right to the stream.org, right?
That's right.
It'll pop right in their little email box. All right. So everyone else, thank you, and we will see you next week. And that will be the end of that.